she said the couple comes in, they're sitting there with their arms crossed. They don't like each other. They're, shaking apart. And she said, okay, I will take you on as a client, or a counselor here will take you on as a client. But here's what you have to do first. I will not see you, and I will not talk to you, and I will not help you until you do this for 2 weeks.
All right, welcome back to Married with Benefits. I'm your host, Brian Goins, and I don't know about you, but have you ever suffered from calendar clutter? It's like, it feels like every space is being taken up on your calendar with kids stuff and work stuff, and it's just all that. And then you go to a marriage conference, or you're reading a book, or you listen to a podcast like mine, and you hear something about a date night. And the idea that I could actually cram another thing onto that calendar, it puts immense pressure on you as a guy, or you as a woman, and you just like, I don't even know if I can make time for that. Well, today in this episode, we're going to be joined again by Shaunti Feldhahn, and also by University of Virginia sociologist, renowned scholar Brad Wilcox. There's a ton of diplomas that are going to be around this table, most of which aren't mine. And we're going to discover with both of them that maybe we're putting a little too much pressure on ourselves. And I don't know if Family Life wants me to be saying this or not, but it could be that date nights aren't the silver bullet to every relationship woe. All right, Shaunti, I've got I'm put not an impossible situation, but it's like if you had to choose, like a choice. I'm going to put a big choice.
You're going to do to me what I always do to everybody else on the survey.
Exactly. Okay. That's right. I want you to actually, I want you to feel what they feel when you're interviewing them. Right. If you had to choose between what's more important in a marriage, but you can only pick one of these. Okay. Either a weekly date night. Okay. Or going to running errands in the week. For a couple, what's more important for that couple to do? So running errands multiple times together? Yes, which even as I hear that, I shudder at the thought, because I know what I think. Because if one of those errands is Target and then grocery store, and it's running errands, it would be running errands. Gosh, yeah. I thought you'd say that, and that frustrates me. So why, we come to this secret. Well, you forced me into a choice. I did force you into a choice. It's obviously not that simple. But why would you pick that one? Why would you pick that one? Because of this secret, and because what we found in the research. Yeah, and this secret is highly happy couples hang out. Yes. And why that word, hang out? It feels so nebulous. Let me just be honest. When I saw the title of that, I immediately just pictured me and Jen in a basement with a couch with a bag of chips watching football. Awesome. You feel like that's hanging out. That qualifies. 100%. Because here's what we've heard. Yes. We've heard this, and I've said this at marriage conferences. Okay. That I probably have too, then. It is about, hey, you need to schedule your next date night. There's this date night pressure, and I've always felt when I heard that, honestly, I would feel this sense of pressure. I've got to plan a date night every week. I've got to get the restaurant. I think about money. Yeah. I think about babysitting. I think about all those things that go with it. And then if I miss a week, I start feeling shame, a failure. And then as we miss two, it's like, oh, it doesn't really matter. This doesn't work. Yeah. Right? So I think there's a lot of people that feel that weekly date night fail. So yes, good way of putting it. And listen, let me say for the record, I love the idea of date nights. Mm-hmm. Date nights are a great thing. Sometimes you have to, in the middle of busy life, you have to say, we have to schedule it. Yeah. That's the only way we're going to get away from the kids is get somebody to watch the kids and go have dinner somewhere and just talk, right? So I'm a fan of that. Okay. So you're not saying this is not either or. This really isn't a forced choice, right? The issue that what we found in this study is that first and foremost, happy couples, the happiest couples, tended to treat each other like best friends. That was even more than treating each other as, their married partner, whatever, or their co-parent, or, they treated each other mostly like best friends. And so then you start looking at, okay, so what are the primary predictors of friendship? What makes good friendship? Yeah. Okay. And when you look at the primary predictors of friendship, and we ask people to guess, we'll stand on stage, Jeff and I will, do this at a marriage event. And we'll be like, okay, everybody guess it. Okay, you guess. We have similar interests. People always guess that. Yeah, yep. Affinities. We tend to like the same type of affinities. I'm just going back to affinities. That's all I've got. What else would they say?
People always guess similar temperaments.
Oh, okay.
Right? Or complementary temperaments.
Right.
That makes really good friendships or similar values.
Right.
All those things are really good. It's not like those are bad. Those are good things, but those are a distant second, third, fourth. Like those are distant compared to the number one predictor of friendship, which is geographic proximity.
Oh, wow.
And you're just the best friends with the people you see the most often. And we all know that's true because we've all had really close friends where one of us moved away. And you still love that person and you're still friends. You still want to talk and whatever, but there's not that intimacy. There's not that day-to-day closeness in the same way. It works the exact same way in marriage. You are the best friends with the people you see the most often. And so one of the factors that makes a really happy marriage is just hanging out together and just literally spending time together.
Well, and that's what ends up happening is, I think in marriage, is that seems pretty natural, especially when it's early. You may not have a lot of money to go out, but you have time generally when you're first starting out, unless, you both are working and you both have good paying jobs, no kids, the dinks.
But you prioritize it.
But you prioritize it, right? You go on adventures, all that kind of stuff. But there's something that I think that does happen in marriage that, that I've heard it said, the first thing to go in marriage is politeness. I've heard that. I wonder if the first thing to go in marriage is just proximity.
Yeah.
Like even though we're living under the same roof, we can find all kinds of things to fill up the space between us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just get busy, just get, kids, job, all that kind of stuff adds in. And suddenly it feels like we're more like business partners than best friends.
Yep. And that is what you're describing is what so many couples are trying to solve, right? Like, because you love your spouse, you care about them, you enjoy your marriage, but you want to go from good to great, or you want to go from so-so and struggling to great.
And you would say that one of the keys to that.
One of the keys to that is this. And this is it was actually really interesting how this recognition of this came near the very end of our study. Yeah. We had heard spouses, the happy couples, we had heard them mention things like, oh yeah, we go hiking, we do this, we, hang out and watch football, we, and yeah. Like, of course, because, couples hang out with one another. And so we just brushed it off. We did not see it as important as it was.
Right.
And then relatively near the end, in fact, actually, we had just hired the survey company to do the big national survey. We couldn't add anything to it. Both because it was already costing us $50,000 and we didn't have any more money, but we couldn't add anything to it. And so I'm like, this is so important. I want to actually hire someone else to do a data run for me on this because we have to quantify whether this matters. And oh my gosh, it really, really matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And when you think about that, hanging out, like it feels nebulous. And there might be people feeling some anxiety about this. Like, okay, is this something else I've got to add into my life? Is this something else I could feel people like that are in the military that have deployments.
Yep, absolutely.
I could feel entrepreneurs that are at a super busy time of life.
Like, we have to be at the restaurant every hour if we want to make payroll. Yeah,
people are on the road for whatever reason or flying a lot. And so just give me examples of what hanging out is. Like, you mentioned some of them, but just give me some high-level examples, and we'll talk about some of the challenges.
Literally, here's the thing. It could be almost anything. It's almost anything that gives you a chance to interact with one another. And sometimes this can be hanging out over the phone because your spouse is in another state for business, or, over Zoom because your spouse is deployed.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Like, these are literally for me and Jeff. I'll give you for me and Jeff. One of the things, we have crazy schedules, right? We travel a lot. Right. I'm often traveling without him. And, when our kids were young, this was something we would have to juggle. And it's a little bit easier now that our youngest has rudely left for college. But this is one of those, areas for us. We realized the easiest thing to do, we would get the kids off to school and we would sit for 20 minutes and have coffee together. Sometimes a little bit more than that, sometimes less. And it just sort of was like, hey, we're having coffee, we're reading the news, like letting our brains kind of, we got the craziness of the kids out the door. Let's let our brains just relax for a minute And it might literally be that we sit there side by side and never talk to one another because we're reading sort of the news or something that's going on, or I'm reading a book. But most of the time, because we're sitting there, it's like, did you see that thing that happened? And it's
almost like you're giving yourself the space for something to happen.
Yes,
and too often we don't even give ourselves a space for that.
Absolutely.
Or we feel like this pressure to create the space, like the weekly date night, where it's like, okay, now we feel pressure to have to perform a little bit. Or have the deep conversations.
Now is the only time. Yeah, exactly.
And so what I hear you saying, it may not be quality time like we would think of couple quality time as we're having great conversations, we're doing things that we don't normally talk about, and all that.
Which is good.
But you're also saying quantity is just as much.
Quantity is, well, the thing about quantity, even if it's just a little bit of time here and there, like in a lot of spaces, like driving to the grocery store, right? Like it gives you a chance to be able to be like, you know what? I forgot to tell you that thing that happened at the office the other day. Like, it's not a huge, like, wow, this momentous thing happened at the office. It was just this little day-to-day thing. And, my boss told me I did a really good job at that report. And that made me so happy. Really? Tell me about it. Okay, 5-minute conversation. Right. But you've caught one another up on things that are important about your life. And that kind of stuff happens more naturally amongst best friends when best friends are just, hey, let's get together and go out to dinner. Let's get together for coffee. Let's go for a hike. Let's go, it kind of naturally happens that way. Yeah.
So let's go back to that idea of what are the obstacles that get in the way of hanging out? Like what keeps us from hanging out? And I think the first one really is just busyness. Like we just make ourselves busy, don't we? And we fill up the space with everything else but each other.
Yeah. And this is the modern disease, right? This is what our lives are like today. We have so many things that we're doing and so many choices that we tend to try to do all of them. I mean, if you think about what a marriage would have been like 200 years ago.
That's a long time ago.
It's a long time ago. But think about it. Okay, so you've got a small family farm. And as soon as the sun goes down, that's kind of it for the day because, you probably don't have a way to.
You don't have electricity.
You don't have lights.
You don't have TV.
Exactly.
You're not watching Netflix. And it's boring all of a sudden.
And so you're making dinner by candlelight and you're sitting down and like catching up on what happened on this particular field of the farm and what's going on with the kids and, whatever. There would have been, if you think about it, there would have been a much more relaxed scope of life because of one reason. You just didn't have any options to do anything other than that. And so today we have every option imaginable, and we haven't yet learned the discipline of going, oh, that means I need to make choices.
Right.
that means that with all these different options, that means that, I can't necessarily take on every single thing I want to do. And, by the way, still know who my spouse is and have time with my kids. Like, you have to actually prioritize. Yeah,
I heard somebody talk about how, decide, that word decide, you hear often it means to kill, suicide, killing of oneself. Infanticide, we've heard patricide. Decide is to kill the other options.
Wow, I gotta write that down.
Yeah, write that down. That's in your next book. So
it is,
that's free, unless you get royalties. I just get just a little bit,
there you go.
Because it's only one word. But is the deciding something is really I am deciding to kill the other options that are available to me. And we don't do that as Americans because there's something about us that goes, we have FOMO, I got to go here and I got to go there. It's really easy to fill up everything. So
we get busy. And so here's what happens with that. So now we're very busy with all these other things, and we don't realize that by definition, we have made, in many cases, not always, but in many cases, by default, we've made our spouse the last priority. And that means by default, we've made our marriage the last priority.
Right.
And if you ask people what their most important human relationship is, almost everybody says their spouse if they're married, almost everyone. And yet, I have made it my last priority.
Yeah. Jen and I like to say that it's like I can tell what you value by what you cheer for, what you pay for, what you sign up for. And so
that's good.
We can say we value our spouse, but if we're not signing up to be with them, whether it's quantity or quality time, if we're not cheering for them, encouraging them along the way, if we're not paying for those opportunities to have a great date night together, then we really don't value them. We really don't set them above everything else. And so, and I find, especially when you're in a struggling marriage, busyness can be that anesthesia for a tough season in marriage. Oof, because I can find all my other hope and joy and everything else, and I don't really want to come back to my spouse. Why would I want to spend time with somebody that I'm struggling with?
And we're going to need to talk about a little bit more of what happens when it is a difficult season. Right. Like, how does this actually work? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, okay, busy. This is an example of both of those things. Mm-hmm. So, we talk to a lot of people, hear a lot of different stories. And this is an example of something where I heard this kind of story from so many different people. So there's this one young woman who she and her husband had 3 little kids. And they were in a incredibly, incredibly dark season of their marriage, like almost splitting apart. And she somehow, I don't know how she got the kind of awareness that she needed to do this, but she said, you know what, let me look at our schedule. They were incredibly busy. They never saw each other, the kids going different directions. And so she looked at their weekly calendar and said, how often do we spend time, just the 2 of us, hanging out, right? Mm-hmm. And it was 15 minutes a week. They almost had no time at all. Wow. It was basically like, I can't remember, it was like Friday mornings he left for work a little later than normal. Mm-hmm. Like, it was really very small. And so she said, we have to change something and do it now. Like,
right away, urgency.
Right, there was an urgency to this. And she said she looked at their calendar and there wasn't a ton that they could change immediately. Mm-hmm. But she noticed that, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, her husband took their 7-year-old son and drove across town to Little League, right? Yeah. Okay, with their son. And she said, there is no reason in the world that I should have to load up a toddler and a baby and drive across town with him to Little League, except for the fact that that is 20 minutes in the car on the way there and 20 minutes on the way back twice a week. Mm. And so she said, at the beginning, that is literally all that we changed.
Yeah.
And so we had that 20 minutes and 20 minutes. And so 40 minutes on those 2 days. And she said, it gave us this a little bit of margin, just a little bit of time to be able to catch up and find out what was going on and tell me what your sister said the other day. I never did find that out. And suddenly they started actually kind of rebuilding a little bit of a friendship. And because she had said, no wonder we're at odds. We don't even like each other anymore. We're not even friends.
Yeah.
And so this started building back. Oh, this is who I married. Right?
As a reminder.
This is a reminder. This is the person that I liked.
I did like this person. I did say yes to this person.
Exactly.
At some point in time.
And here they are again, because now we're actually being able to just have that little tiny bit of margin. And so that is what built them back up. And then they were able to do more because, as she put it, she's like, when you are friends, you can address anything.
Yeah.
But once you're not friends anymore, it's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And that to me was such a good example of, wow, that was so simple. Now, we have to say again, as we always do in these episodes, this is not going to solve the big issues, right? There are going to be some of these things that make friendship difficult. Somebody's feeling betrayed, for example, and somebody has an addiction and it's causing all sorts of stuff. And in those situations, we're not saying that, just hang out.
Just hang out. You'll be fine. Go watch some TV. You'll be all right.
But no, you're going to need some help. You're going to need to work through that. You're going to need, probably some specialized help from somebody who knows how to help you work through that. Right. However, actually finding ways to be friends again, it will actually make those issues.
And it'll make that process a lot easier to deal with because you can start liking each other. So I think that when I'm hearing that first obstacle, busyness, it's like, okay, I'll just assume for the sake of argument that you have your whole calendar packed out, right?
Yeah, for the sake of
argument. Find the margin.
Yep.
Find the gaps. There are gaps. Create the gaps. Yep. And these little things I think are fairly easy to implement, but they're also easy to forget. I can imagine that woman was going, not tonight, I'm exhausted. I don't want to go on this.
And I don't want to go on. She had to do it.
And so she's acting her way into a new kind of feeling. And the byproduct is I get to be friends with my spouse again.
I was talking to somebody the other day because, I do these interviews everywhere when I talk to people. And
do you just randomly sit down like in a subway and then just say, oh, they're married, I'm going to talk to them?
I do.
Do you?
Yeah.
You're that person.
I do. I am that person.
Okay.
I usually carry around a copy of a book so I can show them. And I'm like, I promise I'm not a psycho. I'm actually a social researcher. I promise. And actually, when people are completely anonymous, you hear all sorts of amazing things. So anyway, but I was talking to this woman the other day who was saying she had always wanted to go back to school when her kids had left home.
Yeah.
And that had been out there to make it more professionally viable to get a better paying job and, all that kind of stuff. And she and her husband were both second marriage and both incredibly busy. And so her kids, they were her kids from her first marriage. They grow up, they leave home, and she's like, yes, I get to go back and get my degree, right? Like I get to, go do this. And it was taking a lot of time. And her husband's business was their main way of earning income. And she still wanted to be able to go like talk to each of the kids, these 3 kids at 3 different colleges and be in their lives. And she was like, he was getting the short shrift. And she said she realized, and I said, so how's school going? And she said, I realized I had to put it on pause. Like I did it for a year, recognized that this was taking all my margin. And so either I have to do this, like she listed all the things, like she had a volunteer thing that was a big deal for her. She was like, one of these things I'm going to have to choose to drop.
Right. To kill it.
Yeah. Choose to kill it in order so that when I add school in, I'm not taking all that time away from my husband.
Yeah. That's good.
And he would have to make the same choices, right? Yeah. It's not all on her, right? Like he would have to make the same choices, but it is something we just don't often think about.
That's right. So that's the first one, busyness. I think all of us can relate to that on some level. The second one happens as well. It happens in my family, which is one spouse is unavoidably gone for whatever reason.
Yep.
You think about military families, you think about business and entrepreneurs, all that kind of stuff.
Yep, exactly. And this is one of those things that you would be amazed at how easy it is to assume, well, that's just unavoidable. So we're just going to sort of have this distance between us. And what we found with the highly happy couples is that they went, no, we're not going to have this distance.
So in other words, it's not like in the highly happy category of couples, you just had people that were always at home.
Correct. No.
These are people that could be on any strata, entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean,
doctors, all that.
Long distance truck drivers, military deployed, blah, blah, blah. Like all of the above. Yeah. And one of the things that we saw is that these highly happy couples, they may not think of it this way because we don't always I'm going to make a choice to prioritize my marriage today. We don't necessarily think about that way. But what they actually did was making a choice to prioritize their marriage. So, for example, I heard over and over again from road warrior spouses, whether it was the husband or the wife, gone Monday through Friday on a consulting gig in different states all the time, that they would and it was a sacrifice. They would sacrifice their sleep in order to take the red eye back, or in order to get up super, super early and get back home in order to be able to see their kids off to school the next morning, or, whatever. They would say, well, yeah, it's going to exhaust me and I'm already tired from a long week away, but that's the choice that I made. I need to make sure this job doesn't hurt that part of our marriage. Or, for example, had a lot of military spouses say, video conferences, video calls, they're a beautiful thing.
Yes. Thank you for technology. That would have happened 200 years ago.
Oh, yeah. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, this is one of these things this is such a blessing to be able to just do a free Zoom call, or whatever. So that was really common. The other thing that was interesting is that sometimes, and often it was the wife that kind of prompted this. If the wife was at home and the military husband was, deployed, is the wife would start a question conversation and would here's the question for the day.
Okay.
So it gave them something to be able to engage about. Here's sort of the question for the day. And And yeah, they could still talk about other things.
Why are you gone so long? Why don't you care about me and call me ever? Was that the kind of conversation?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think so.
That is good. So it was more intriguing. It was more, I'm going to create some mystery, or I'm going to talk about something, or.
Well, if you think about it, let's just pretend that you're not deployed and that you're sitting on the couch on a Saturday afternoon watching college football. Okay.
Sounds like a great Saturday.
I love that kind of thing with Jeff. Like, he turned me into a Michigan fan, right? And University of, and proudly, I will say that because
they won this year.
They just won.
I was going to say it's been a hard few decades.
20 years, yeah. But that's one thing that we will often do, and so we'll sit there, and what comes up in the commercial breaks is, hey, whatever happened with, you were telling me about that you were thinking about doing this new thing in your business, or what happened with that difficult client?
Yeah.
I never found out about that. Like, that kind of stuff comes up naturally if you're sitting together.
Right.
If you're deployed, or you're on the other side of the country for business, or you're working in the restaurant all hours because, that's what you have to do. You don't think about those things. And so a question conversation is a good idea. It's a little trick.
Because this is one for me. I'm on the road a lot more than Jen is, and honestly, it's like I'm done with the day, and I just want to veg out. I just want to watch TV. I just want to relax. I don't want to make the call home. I hate to say that.
Yeah.
I will, and I do, but that's not the first thing in my mind. Or I'm compartmentalized because when you're on the road, you tend to overwork yourself.
Yes, like if I'm out anyway, I might as well work the 18-hour day.
So for me, learning how to schedule those times in the better part of my day. So whether that's first thing in the morning before I get going, or whether it's to intentionally put on my calendar 30 minutes, talk to Jen, or something like that helps me get in that framework. But this would be a cool thing because it'd be different and creative. I like that. It is.
Well, and it's like something as simple as when because I'm like you, I'm on the road a lot. And it's something as simple as I'm getting in the car and I'm driving to the church where I'm going to speak, and I've got 15 minutes. And so I call Jeff, right? Because it gives me just a touch.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's good. Okay. So busyness, one spouse is unavoidably gone from the other. Third one, competition for others for attention, which feels like busyness, but give me some difference on that.
Yeah. It's obviously overlaid with busyness, but this is one of those things that, we have to be so careful about, because the two biggest ones stereotypically for women and for men, but there's a reason for the stereotype, is the kids taking the wife's attention away from the marriage, and work taking the husband's attention away from marriage. And please hear me. Don't write in angry emails. I know that there's a stereotype.
There's a ton of women working that are going, wait,
well, look at me, right? I'm the one on the road, right? So I get that this is a stereotype for a reason. However, and there's plenty of exceptions. However, these two kind of archetypes are things we need to be really careful of, because one of the things, for example, that starts happening to a lot of women, not all, but to a lot of women when we have kids, is we start all of our attention and our mental kind of focus and our emotional effort and our energy. It's just naturally put towards that. And similar with a husband is, I want to provide for my family. I know I need to keep everybody at work happy. I know I need to take that call, at 10 o'clock at night instead of being with my wife.
Or hobbies. Leisure has become the next thing I'm finding my value and identity in. And so there's a ton of that happening.
All of that is happening. Church, church stuff is
all good things. And these are all good things.
I mean, you were a pastor, right? Church can take over your life.
Right.
And that's, I'm quite sure, not the way God intended. This is something to equip and empower and send the saints out, not to take over our marriages.
Yeah.
So all those things that compete.
Yep.
And it is not the same as busyness, because it is emotional competition. It is energy competition, as well as actually the physical competition.
So hanging out helps with that, because there's a part of me that's going, okay, so I am emotionally exhausted, and my hangout just ends up being TV.
Yes.
And I think that's where some people end up landing. You're not meaning that.
No. I am literally meaning if all of your emotional energy is being put towards the kids, for example, and you're not even thinking about your spouse. You're not even You're not even
They're not
present.
on your radar.
We know a couple, I have to say this carefully. We know a couple who it was the reverse for them. The husband was emotionally incredibly invested in his son's athletic career, all the way from little bitty. He was very athletic all the way up through college. And as soon as the son graduated from college, stopped playing college sports, which, going every weekend to see the son play college sports, suddenly, oh, wow, like, I don't know my wife. Like, I haven't had any emotional engagement with my wife in all these years because I've been so focused, had no idea what to do with themselves. And that's an ongoing situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got busyness. You've got a spouse who's unavoidably gone all the time. You've got competition for others for these attention. It occurs to me that all of those are actually choices we make.
Yeah.
So we say yes to the things on the calendar. We say yes to the road teams.
We do.
We sign up for all this stuff. So it's like we can only, in some sense, blame ourselves. And it's like you have to take an honest audit and look and say, what needs to come off so that we can have margin to hang out? What needs to change? What trip do we need to take more often? Do I need to start going with you to, heaven forbid, Target? Whatever it might be. How do I prioritize? How do I bring the marriage back up into my radar so that I'm having? But this last obstacle, as I think about, is one that we can't always pick.
Right.
It's the season of marital difficulty. Now, some of those first three things
lead to that. Like that last story I was telling. Yeah.
I didn't choose my spouse's cancer. I didn't choose whatever it might be. Yeah. There are difficulties that come for a variety of reasons.
Right. The marital
Kid sickness, all that kind of stuff.
When the difficulties in life have become a marital difficulty, that's when, that becomes then a challenge to hanging out because, as we were talking about earlier, you are trying to avoid the conflict. Mm-hmm. I used to love this spouse of mine. Now I'm not even sure I like them, but I don't want to be fighting with them all the time.
Right. When we do hang out, it's miserable.
When we do hang out, we're always like at each other's throats. So I'm just going to be over here in my corner working or whatever, or I'm going to be over here distracting myself with whatever. And so we actually go further and further and further away from hanging out. And we are getting further and further and further away from the very thing that creates the glue to keep us together. And so I was fascinated in this research. I talked to a woman named Joanna Berry. This was a number of years ago. She was the director of this counseling center, very, very large counseling center in Texas. And she told me something that was such an aha moment. This counseling center had this incredible reputation. Like, if you are about to get divorced, go there because everybody who goes there doesn't get divorced.
Wow.
Yeah. Like
that's a great reputation.
It was a great reputation. And now, I don't know what the actual statistics are or whatever, but that was basically
that was a general ethos.
And it was true. Yeah. Right. So, I asked her, I'm like, tell me your secret. Tell me what you do. She's like, every one of my counselors, she had a bunch of different counselors. She said, every one of my counselors is trained with this method. She said, the couple comes in, they're sitting there with their arms crossed. They don't like each other. They're, shaking apart. And so I do the usual intake, blah, 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 blah. And she said, okay, I will take you on as a client, or a counselor here will take you on as a client. But here's what you have to do first. I will not see you, and I will not talk to you, and I will not help you until you do this for 2 weeks. Every night or sometime every day, you need to spend 30 minutes together as friends.
Every day.
Every day with no negativity. She's like, you can set your watch if you want. You're not allowed to fight for that 30 minutes. And at the end of that 30 minutes, if you want to start fighting again, fine. But for 30 minutes every day, you have to spend time together just talking as friends. You're not comparing kids' schedules. You're not like figuring out technical things about why the kitchen sink is broken. Like you're just catching up as friends. And she said, by the time that couple comes in for regular counseling, everything else there was just normal marriage counseling. She said, by the time they come in 2 weeks later, they have become friends again and they can work on what needs to be worked on. And they believe the best more of one another, which is another thing that tends to go away when you're in that difficulty, like we were talking earlier. Right. And so they're much more able then to actually buckle down and work on what needs to happen.
And so it gets back to that proximity. Yes. That proximity principle.
You have to build it.
Build it up, make the space, create the time. And yes, all 4 of those obstacles in any marriage is going to be a reality. Busyness, one spouse is gone for whatever reason, unavoidably. You've got competing attentions. Everything's screaming at us. It reminded me of when my daughter, Brantley, when she was really young, and I would come home from work and I would come in and give Jen a big hug, and she would take her little hands and she would go right in between us and she would just pull us apart. She'd go, "Don't forget about me. Don't forget about me." And I think, when she got older, same thing happened. She just is a lot stronger, and teenagers, it's amazing how they can pull parents apart in all kinds of things, whether it's because of sports or just emotional drama, whatever it might be. There is something always asking and yelling at us, "Don't forget about me. I got this, I got that." All the while, internally, our spouse is going, "Have you forgotten about me?"
And the answer is probably in some ways.
And so how do we come together?
Yep.
Let me break in here just a minute. One of the best things that Jen and I do as a couple is that we try to get away at least once a year, just as a couple, just to work intentionally on our marriage. Like we say, great marriages don't just happen, that it takes some intentionality to experience oneness. And in a culture where we're moving so fast, where we miss each other all the time, the Weekend to Remember is a 3-day event where you get to pull the emergency brake up on life and have the conversations that you most need to have, but probably aren't having. And so if you like this, if you like Married with Benefits, let me just say, you're going to love Weekend to Remember. It's a great opportunity just to get back on the same page with each other. All right, let's get back into the conversation. One of my favorite quotes in your book is from Joanna Berry. She reinforces this idea. The studies on this have all found the same thing I've seen in my practice. I have never seen a couple who is having problems who is also having quality time.
Wow, big statement. Yep.
Never. Instead, they are having problems, so they spend less time together in order to avoid the conflict, kind of like what we were saying. And then what they think is a solution, avoiding each other, becomes the problem.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
I just think that is why it's so important that we start prioritizing hanging out, whether that's quantity, whether that's quality, whether it's the date night. Those are great, important things to do, or if it's just the date coffee. Jen and I have a saying, that it's you've got to calendar your companionship.
That's so good.
If we don't put it on the calendar, because if it's on the calendar, generally it happens.
Yeah.
And so it's important just to find your thing. For Jen and I, it's 1 in 7, 1 in 3:30, 1 in 365. So once a week we try to have a check-in coffee. And sometimes and now that our kids have gotten older, it's a little bit easier to have that. When you have ankle biters, it's hard it's hard to do that. And so you got to maybe find that lunch or find that 20 minutes, wherever it might be. And that's all it is 20 minutes maybe, where we create the space where Jen just starts unloading things that I didn't hear yesterday, or she needed to talk about, or I am talking about work or something like that. 1 in 30 is that fun date night. And then 1 in 365 is once a year, we try to do something with just the two of us. So that's us.
That's cool.
What about you? Where do you find your hangout?
So we do 2 things. We do the morning coffee, right? And we take advantage of the fact that we are traveling sometimes together to be able to say, okay, this is a work trip, but we're going to kind of tack on. Like we're going to say, we're going to a new place. Let's tack on a day. Let's figure out. And this was hard. Like when we had the young kids, to be honest, we didn't actually do that because it's like, I'm already gone from them for 2 days. I don't want to be gone from them for 3 days. I'm not going to do that. But that concept, I mean, you can tack on. I came across somebody who was near the ball fields near where we live. There's a Dairy Queen right near the ball fields, and there was a soccer practice going on. And there's a couple sitting in the Dairy Queen, clearly just catching up. And they had like soccer paraphernalia. And I'm like, I can tell that this is a couple who dropped their 10-year-old off at soccer.
It's built-in childcare. You're paying for that soccer team.
Paying for it. And so you could tell that they have 45 minutes during the practice and they're going to use it, like tack on.
I love that analogy too. It's like, look for the places where you can tack on, because what ends up happening is we fill it with other things. We tack on other things.
Right.
And we usually fill it with stuff that is not about our marriage. So we're just challenging you, find the space where you can fill it up with something that has to do with your marriage. And I think it really goes back to that principle of we're calling you to cleave. You know, when God said that in Genesis chapter 2, cleave is in the present tense. Yeah. It is a Hebrew word in the present tense. It is an ongoing, I'm expecting you to continually leave and forsake dependence upon those things that keep you from oneness. But that's the negative side, you know, whether it's parents, whether it's your single way of life, whether it's hobbies. Leave those things. That doesn't mean you ignore them. You don't ignore your parents or any of that kind of stuff. But you forsake dependence upon and you cleave. You say, I'm going to find the ways to ongoing, to dabak, that Hebrew word, to come together, stick like glue is another way to think about it.
Sit together at Dairy Queen.
And that might be sticking together at Dairy Queen, which I'm suddenly hungry for that.
It may be that you do a hobby together.
Yeah.
Right?
And it all comes back to your marriage verse, which I did not realize this until today.
Yes.
This is a great marriage verse.
Yeah. When we got married, we had all of our, marriage invitations and all that kind of stuff printed up with Song of Songs 5:16, which says, "This is my beloved and this is my friend."
Yeah. And that's really why we got married. It wasn't to have a spouse. It was to have a lifelong friend.
Yeah.
And friendship takes proximity, takes hanging out. I'm glad you discovered all that, Shaunti. That's good stuff.
Yeah, this is a fun one.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us for this episode. If you enjoy this podcast, please hit like or subscribe. And please leave a review or a comment. It just helps get the word out to more couples so that they could find hope for their own marriage. And listen, if you haven't picked up Shaunti's book that we're talking about all this season long, The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages, you're going to want to get that and maybe grab one to give away, because that's really what we're about here at Family Life. We want to help you experience oneness so that you could impact your corner of the world. And listen, we've got a lot more help and hope for your marriage and family at FamilyLife.com. You can find other articles, you can find podcasts, you can find shows, small group resources. You'll want to check that out at FamilyLife.com.